Hi everybody, thank you for joining us today on the webinar, Continuous Delivery and the Data Warehouse, Overcoming the Challenges of Agile Methods. Before we begin the session, I want to go over a few technical details. Please note you will be on mute during the session. We are talking now, so if you can't hear us, please type a message in the question box in the control panel. But first, please check your speakers and go to webinar audio settings. We will do a Q&A session at the end. You can start submitting your questions on the Q&A bar on the GoToWebinar dashboard. And also note that we are recording the session, and an online version of the webinar will be put on the DBmaster website later this week, and you will all receive an email with the link. I want to hand over the broadcast to John. John, thank you so much for doing that with us. Please take it from here.
I work for Chall. I've been a MI development team lead for 4 years at this company, and I've been in the world of business intelligence for over 10 years. As you can see from the photo, I like to go on holiday with Chall. I think that photo is from Turkey. I lead a team of 10 developers. They're a mixture of contract and permanent staff. What's the current sort of project work that we're working on right now is a mixture of things. There's always a lot going on. So at the moment there is a large re-architecture program going on called Phoenix, which for us consists of approximately 6 projects, and in conjunction alongside that we also get other programs of work happening at the same time. So we are constantly having to juggle a lot of different demands on our time. This is partly one of the drivers for continuous delivery, as we are under pressure to deliver quickly, rapidly, and to quality and time. Currently, however, we are doing all of our releases by hand, and we're approximately doing about 2 or 3 builds per month, 1 release per project. Our aspiration is a lot more than that. We would like to build daily and do a single release per month across all our projects, and to make that predictable. By making it predictable, it gives a lot more confidence to the business that we can deliver in increments and to set timescales. So that's a summary of what was driving us to look at continuous delivery. As part of this presentation, I'm going to talk about people, process, and technology, and this is how we've been overcoming the challenges that we faced, and you need to address it from multiple directions. You can't just look at the technology, you need to look at other things as well. So starting with the challenges we had on the people front, first thing you need to do is to build a business case. At Chewy, we did that in increments. To start with, we built the business case for continuous integration, primarily because there was no appetite at that time for moving to an agile methodology. I felt there would still be benefits around automating releases, and I was able to justify, based on the savings in time it takes for you to build releases, and savings in time wasted fixing things that go wrong. We worked out the cost savings from that and built a business case around that. But what's quite important, if you take that approach, is to resist any attempts to reduce headcount. It's not about reducing headcount, it's about improving productivity and time to market. As a second stage, we then moved over to building a business case for agile methods and an associated application lifecycle management tool with that. That, with hindsight, it would have been preferable to do that the other way around and to do agile methods first. However, given the politics at the time, it was not possible to do it that way around. Finally, once we've implemented agile methods to some extent, we then need to focus on things like test-driven development as well, and other aspects of extreme programming and agile methods. So you don't necessarily have to do everything all at the same time. You can build a business case for each individually and do it in increments, and it makes it sometimes less of a culture shock and something that people are more willing to accept. In order to actually deliver, you need to get buy-in from all the different environment owners that are going to be touched by continuous integration. So you need to be talking to your testers, your development team, your operations team, and all the management associated with that. Unless you get buy-in in terms of the concepts, no one is going to assist you to get there. So there's a lot of talking that needs to be done. In addition, ideally you would build a team dedicated to build this. It's not an insignificant piece of work. It is a large piece of work, and it would be preferable to have a team around that. I'm speaking from hindsight here. I didn't get a team, and it's taken me a prolonged period of time to get the thing delivered. So my recommendation is to get the team with the right skills to build it in a reasonable time scale. And that can be a challenge in itself because, for example, to have the right skills to build continuous integration in the environment I'm working in, you would need skills around Informatica administration, you'd need Perl, Unix, version control, Hudson, DB Maestro, Oracle, Agile concepts, and the willingness to actually experiment and make it work. So getting the right people to do the work is important. You also need to tread a bit carefully and be diplomatic. If you're also bringing in agile methods, it could well affect job roles within the organization. For example, particularly the project managers may well be impacted by the introduction of a Scrum Master. The product owner may well start doing things that he wasn't necessarily doing before in his job. So it's important to bring all of these people along with you as well if you are intending to introduce agile methods. Moving on to process. So yeah, you need to make a decision about whether you're going to do waterfall or agile delivery. There are fors and against for both. And that's ultimately up to the management in your business. At Chewy, we did decide to go agile, and one of the first things that you'll notice is that the PMO won't necessarily agree with what you're doing, and they may have a number of gates and processes in place which you may need to tackle. In addition, you need to be focusing, if you are going down the agile route, you need to be focusing on how you build your user stories. You aren't going to be able to deliver in increments if you're designing everything up front and doing all your analysis up front. And so that's one of the key challenges in terms of data warehouses, is working out how to do user stories and build in increments, which has got nothing to do with the technical aspects of continuous integration, but it does assist you getting to that regular incremental builds. And my recommendation is that you look at what we looked at Chewy, which is a process called BEAM, which is short for Business Event Analysis Method. I'm not going to talk through all of that because that would be a whole presentation in itself. So we opted to go with agile development. Again, I'm not going to try and convince you and explain all of the Agile method, but this diagram is quite a good summary of what it is. And I'd like to point out that the last circle, the smallest circle, is about continuous delivery, continuous testing, continuous integration, continuous builds. So it fits nicely with an Agile method. If you want to build rapidly and you want to build working software, I believe that continuous integration and test-driven development is the way to go. In order to build the business case for Agile methods and to help you get there, I strongly recommend, and this is what we did at Chewy, to get an ALM tool, an application lifecycle management tool. This helps you manage your work, and there are various vendors who provide software that enable you to do that. These are three of the main contenders, and I strongly recommend you get their assistance. They're experts in doing that, and they will help you roll out Agile methods. Once you've started down that path and you start having conversations with the PMO, they'll probably throw something like this at you. Those of you who work in waterfall methods will be familiar with something along these lines, where you have certain heavyweight processes, lots of documentation, lots of sign-offs, and lots of gates before you go through all the different phases from new idea, evaluation, definition, development, testing, implementation to close. In order to it depends on how you're rolling out your Agile methods and how much support you have from senior level management. If you have a top-down rollout of Agile and you've got strong support from above and they're the people who are driving it and making it happen, then it might be that you could do a big bang approach to Agile rollout. That wasn't the case at Chewy. It was a bottom-up push from the development teams, which meant that we had to tread very carefully about how we persuaded the PMO and other management to proceed down this route. And the way that we did that was to do a phased transition. So we started off by saying, well, let's just tackle gates 3 and 4. Let's do something called water scrumfall, where it's a kind of hybrid approach. So that way, the PMO retained control over the initial phases and the scope, and hence the cost of the project. And the definition, the detailed definition and the development tests were done in iterations or sprints. This allowed us to get moving down the Agile path without having to go fully Agile. However, it is possible to take this further, and that's where continuous integration comes in. It breaks down the next gate, which is gate 5. So you're looking at improving the rapid deployments. So you need a lighter weight sign-off process between testing and deployment. And it's not to say it's uncontrolled. You need to put in controls. Environment owners should have control over what happens in their environments, but you can automate that and make that something that is easy to do rather than a lot of documentation and a lot of meetings. And then once you've managed to achieve that, you could potentially break down the remaining gates and go fully Agile. That would require a lot of effort by the PMO to become more Agile themselves, and there is a process out there called SAFe, or Scaled Agile for Enterprises, which is a process that could help you get there, or an approach that could help you get there. We haven't yet managed to achieve that at Chewy, but we are intending to go down that route. So moving on to the technology, we had A number of technical challenges at Chewy in the MI team, data warehouse team. We had version control which was quite disorganized. It was difficult to revert to earlier versions of the code. Basically, developers could even choose or not to choose to use version control. They could release code that wasn't in version control. And it doesn't matter how many manual checks and steps and procedures you put in place, eventually it will go wrong unless it's enforced programmatically in some way. So by linking your version control into continuous integration, it forces it to be organized. If you don't check it in, it doesn't get released and it's not part of the package. We had release issues, so all our releases are done by hand. We make a lot of errors. It becomes difficult to deploy Oracle DDL changes. They could work in one place and not in another. If your processes are not strong, it's likely that your environments are out of sync, and that can affect your deployment scripts. So your Oracle code might work deploying to one place, and then it might be a different set of code that needs to go somewhere else, and so your release will fail. Also, we found that release numbering, due to the nature of how we were doing things, was a bit meaningless, was a bit inaccurate. Again, it was done by hand. It could actually lead to more confusion than being of benefit. We also had multiple development streams going on. So as an example, you could be working on your main trunk, your main development code. There could be an incident in production, and you need to address that incident on an earlier version of your code which is not available in your environment. So we had those kind of problems as well. I mentioned inconsistencies. We had issues of unit testing. Again, it was all done by hand. So you're reliant on the developers doing it to a certain quality, but you have no easy way to check that they have done that. If you had something more automated, you might be able to work out what your code coverage is in terms of testing, and you might be able to understand better whether you're delivering good unit testing or not. We've had, typically in a data warehouse, large data sets in many of our environments, but most notably we had large data sets in our development environment, and that meant that it could lead to slow testing. We're trying to run code off large amounts of data, which slows things down, which means that you can't necessarily finish what you need to do quick enough to get to that rapid deployment stage. We also had no way of doing any data set management, so the data means something. You have reference data in data warehousing which needs to be set up in a certain way, and if that isn't managed, it can become an issue in whichever environment you're in, because if the data is not what it's supposed to be, your code may not work properly. We had a significant amount of technical debt when I joined the company. What I mean by that is things where we haven't, as a company, followed best practice or good practice. So the reason I'm mentioning that is this would lead to a lot of production incidents. We would then have a lot of pressure to fix those things, and the more of those that you have, the less time you will have to do anything strategic like rolling out agile methods or rolling out continuous integration. So you really need to get on top of that. So what did we do about it? So for those first few, continuous integration was our answer. For our unit testing, we have been looking at test-driven development methods. We limited our large data sets at the database level, so we were effectively forced to only use a certain amount of data in our particular environments, which meant that we could actually test our code more rapidly. We have been looking at DB Maestro and virtualization to handle our dataset management. And to tackle our technical debt, first of all, we consolidated our technology. That's quite important. We moved from a situation where we had probably 30% of our code on PL/SQL, another 30% on Unix, another 30% on Informatica, and then 10% in Java and other bits and pieces. This doesn't lend itself to reusable code. It doesn't lend itself to code that talks well to each other, and it doesn't lend itself to developing rapidly. And it hinders your deployments because you now need to manage a lot of different types of code. So we moved to consolidate on Informatica, which we probably ended up with about 95% Informatica, and then the other 5% around Unix and Java. We spent a lot of time clearing down all those production incidents to free us up to focus on strategy, on strategic work. We implemented some things that everybody should be doing. Surprising how many people don't, but we implemented coding standards, code reuse, and we enforced them through peer review or code review. So in terms of continuous integration, what you'll find is your version control tools are appropriate for certain types of technology. So, for example, our standard version control tool at Chewy was Subversion, but that's very good at handling files, so Unix scripts, but it's not so good at handling Oracle DDL because you can have different DDL depending on which environment you're deploying to and what the state of that environment is. In addition, it's not very good at handling Informatica code. Informatica code is held within a repository, a database repository, and it has basically the way that you deploy Informatica code is through exports of XML from that repository. So you could, and a lot of firms do this, is pull all that XML individually for each piece of code into your version control tool. But I've found with experience that that's very slow, and it can also have a lot of problems in terms of managing it, and it's a lot of effort in terms of managing it. So it doesn't lend itself to rapid deployments or continuous integration. So what we did, we introduced DB Maestro, which is very good at handling the Oracle changes. So that sits directly on top of the Oracle database, and you check in and check out your code directly on the database. And we used it to generate the appropriate DDL scripts dynamically, so that when we moved between different environments, we had the correct DDL every time. Likewise with Informatica, we used the inbuilt versioning within Informatica, team-based development, which allowed us to check in and check out directly on the Informatica repository. And we took the approach of repository level exports to allow us to deploy the whole repository to the next environment. Now that is quite rapid. and it does put a lot of onus on the developers to check their code in only when it's appropriate to do so. So it's strongly recommended that you test your release in another environment before it goes out to another team or system test team, for example. So because we've now got all these version control tools, it's important to keep them in sync so that they actually work together and you don't get hindered by that. The approach that we took was to create a bespoke application with Perl scripts which communicated to those version control tools via their command line interfaces and allowed us to manage and label the code within those within those version control tools appropriately, so that we could pick out what was needed for the release. So that was all managed through Perl. It could be any language; it doesn't have to be Perl. It just happened to be a good fit here. What we also did as a side benefit of that, we centralized our configuration or for system variables and environment variables in one place. So we ended up with XML configuration files which told us exactly how each environment was set up, and also the passwords for all the different areas of those environments on those configuration files. So that meant that we had a single point of change to go to, and if we needed to amend our environments or change any passwords. And we then reused that code or that configuration for other parts of our application outside of continuous integration. So it became quite a powerful feature in itself. So once we had this bespoke application, a good way of managing it was to plug it into a more standard continuous integration tool. One of those, I mean, there's a number of them, but the one that we selected was Hudson, and that provided us with a very good web interface to our application. It provided, so it was very easy to use. We had centralized logging of everything that was happening through that tool, and we had a security layer within it which allowed the different environment owners to control what was happening in their respective environments whilst this continuous integration application was running. So the output of all of that was a bunch of generated deployment scripts and associated documents or whatever else was needed in terms of standards at the company. So we also produced automatically release notes. So it became a very simple process to build and deploy our scripts all automatically through the GUI. And we scheduled that to run on a nightly basis whilst deploying to our pre-test or link environment. That enabled us to do our nightly builds, and then we could test whether that was actually working before we released it any further. Okay, so just to be clear, it currently is handling Unix code, Oracle code, whether that be DDL or PL SQL, and also Informatica code itself. In order to make that work, we needed to have the appropriate environments set up. So the standard approach is to have development, system tests, user acceptance testing, and production. But we needed some additional environments to help us operate with this continuous integration process. So we introduced the link environment, which allows us to do our nightly builds and do that testing before we release it any further, so we can check that our release works and our end-to-end run works. Once that's done, it could go. The release goes into system test. Now, We also introduced another environment called patch. Now this is in case you needed to make a fix on something that's happened in system test without disrupting your main development stream. So you could then deploy from system test to patch, make necessary changes, and then redeploy it to system test. And that may well then move on to further environments, but you would then need to do a code merge back from patch to development. It's one approach. You could avoid that and go directly to development, make your change there and then release that, but things will have moved on, so you won't just be releasing a fix to the code that's in SIT. You'll probably end up releasing other things as well. And it's a judgment call as to whether you'd want to do whichever way at that particular point in time. In addition, you've got a fast track route, which is what we called emergency bug fix. So that's EBF and SIT EBF. That was our fast track route in case we've got a problem on production. So we would generate the appropriate code in that environment to mirror production, make the fix in the EBF stream, and then promote through that way and then do a code merge again back into the mainstream. So that allowed us to have enough environments to deal with different development streams in effect. So how does DB Maestro fit in with that? It's DB Maestro that's helping us coordinate those environments. So it's managing the Oracle code in the background, plugged into the rest of the build and deployment application. So this wouldn't have been a fully automated process without DB Maestro, because it enables us to synchronize our environments on the Oracle level without any or very little interaction with the people who are running the process. So that isn't the end of it. Other than continuous integration, what are we doing next at Chewy? So it's more than just continuous integration. What we actually need at Chewy is a focus on DevOps. Continuous integration is one aspect of DevOps, and the approach that Chewy are taking is they've introduced a new role called an Agile Development Lead. And he's unlikely to be able to make all the changes that are necessary by himself. He's not going to be an expert in every single technology. So he's going to need certain subject area DevOps champions to assist him in rolling out that kind of DevOps culture change. And that's what it is. It's quite a big mindset change for development teams to start taking ownership of releases and not just throwing it over to the fence and it becoming someone else's problem. You also need to consider your infrastructure. I mean, currently at Chewy, our environments are built by hand. That in itself is not very agile, and we would need to consider other ways of doing that. So you need to be looking at orchestration. So there are various tools out there that can help with that. The most popular ones or the most known ones are Puppet and Chef. Also, there are other things out there to help you with cloud, so Amazon Web Services, things like that. All these sorts of things need to be considered in terms of scaling up what you're doing. For example, on continuous integration, at the moment at Chewy, we've got Hudson sited on one server, which is okay for the MI team, but should we choose to roll out continuous integration to a wider audience than MI within IT, one server is not going to cut it. So how do we manage that? So you could try and cut costs and make use of all those PCs that are sitting under people's desks and then somehow cluster them up. But the exact approach that we're going to take here needs to be looked at. And there's various ways we could do that. Doesn't end with continuous integration. Strongly recommend that you look at test-driven development in association with continuous integration. Otherwise, you'll end up rapidly deploying all your defects straight to other environments. So the two go hand in hand. We also need to address our data set management concerns here at Chewy still. We haven't yet come up with a solution, but there are features of DB Maestro that can help with that. The other thing is the principles of automation can reap rewards in other areas too. You could look at code automation, and there are tools out there to help with that, particularly in the data warehousing ETL world. For example, there is a company called ETL Factory who have an application that can help with that, and you may find there are consultancies out there that have their own products as well. I know of one, Agile Solutions, that have a similar product. So there are ways to bring down the speed at which you, increase the speed of your development, which is what we're trying to achieve here, is to get your code to production, to quality as quickly as possible. So that's it from me. We have Q&A to consider.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for doing this fascinating presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed it. Now would be the time to submit your questions. We have here John, of course, and also Yaniv Yehuda, who is the CTO of DB Maestro. So if you have any questions that you want to pose to him, he's also online with us. So let me have a look. I will start with the first question. It's a question for John. Can you implement continuous integration without implementing agile methods? John, take it.
Okay, so this depends on the frequency of releases to production that you're aiming for, and whether you're building code for a single project or across multiple projects. So you could take the approach in Waterfall where you have a single release to production at the end of your project, but you could have a form of continuous integration alongside that. You could do multiple builds and test cycles to get confidence in your release, and then do that final release at the end of the project. If, however, you want more frequent releases to production, or if you're working on multiple projects simultaneously with the same code base, I would strongly recommend you use agile methods in conjunction with continuous integration.
Okay, thank you. John, another question for you. What happens if there is a problem? How can you back out the code?
Okay, you need to generate backout scripts at the same time as you generate the release scripts. DB Maestro can help you do that. You could use it to generate both the deployment and the backout scripts at the same time. You just reverse the direction you're comparing the code sets in. Alternatively, you could take backups of your target system and then use that as a backout strategy, restoring from the backups that you've taken.
Okay. Now I have a question for Yaniv. We have a release management solution. Does DB Maestro replace that?
Thanks, Sophia. No, DB Maestro actually plugs into the release cycle. It doesn't replace anything. So essentially, as John has implemented it, you can either use command line interfaces or APIs and web services to link and actuate the relevant deployments that you need in order to go from either development to integration to testing and production, or to to merge branches of several team working in parallel. So you don't. This is actually something complementing existing tools and not replacing them.
Thank you. I think we will take one last question. Again, a question for Yaniv. How does DB Maestro connect with the version control we have on board?
Okay, thanks again, Sarah. Actually, DB Maestro comes with its own repository. As John mentioned in the beginning, it's a bit challenging to treat the database as a list of scripts that goes into the version control. Challenges are numerous. I wouldn't count them now, but essentially, in order to keep coherence with the application, with the code, and make sure we can connect the application with the database at any time and do deployments based on what needs to be deployed and not exactly what was developed at the time, what we recommend doing is use task-based development, meaning you integrate your code and database changes based on change requests, trouble tickets, work items, etc. All the modern development solutions and workflow solutions work this way. So either using TFS, if you're using RTC, if you're using Jira, that's a very common way to solve that. And by the end of the day, it gives you a very easy way to deploy changes, because you just need to decide what feature or what collection of bug fixes you want to deploy, and then group the code changes together with database changes relevant to this specific task, and so deploy them together.
Thank you. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you so much, John, for doing that. I think it was fascinating, and I hope that everybody enjoyed it. And stay tuned for the next webinar. Thank you, and have a good day.